May. The centre has 1 week's time to file its reply, after which the petitioners in this case will have 5 days' time to peruse the centre's reply, and then the court will meet again on the 5th of May. But the big question, after 2 days of what is a very, very significant hearing on a law that was passed in both houses of parliament, the fact that it was challenged within days, there was an almost urgent hearing that was granted by a bench headed by the Chief Justice himself. Of course, the urgency is also born of the fact that the Chief Justice retires in a few days' time. But question needs to be asked, did the centre's lawyers do a not so particularly good job of defending this law? A law which the centre has said in Parliament. You heard, I heard, all of us heard the various central ministers in Parliament defending this law as a progressive reform. If it is a progressive reform, then why couldn't the centre's lawyers defend it more vehemently and defend it so as a progressive piece of legislation in the Supreme Court? And if so, if we get this interim order by the court, as and when that happens, May 5th at the next hearing or the hearing after that, if we are to get an interim order eventually, which is going to put a stay on this Waqf by user or restore portions of this Waqf by user clause, which is the most contentious, and also put a stay on appointment of non-Muslims on the Waqf board, are we then going back to what was described as an iniquitous, old, regressive law? But first, I want to bring you up to speed with what was a dramatic day two of the hearing in the Supreme Court and some of the key takeaways. These are the big headlines that emerged in the Waqf hearing. Number one, there is going to be no change to the character of any of the Waqf assets, even if they are Waqf by user properties, for the next 1 week. In fact, for the next 2 weeks till the 5th of May, when the next hearing will happen. Non-Muslims cannot be appointed by the central board or by the state Waqf boards until the next hearing. This again was a point of contention. 2 non-Muslims to be appointed out of 20 plus in the Waqf boards and in the Waqf councils. The status of all existing Waqf by user properties shall not be tinkered with, shall not be denotified, and the status quo ante as it existed before this law was passed by Parliament earlier this month will be maintained in all Waqf by user properties. No appointment of Waqf board or Waqf council can take place either by state or by centre. The centre has been given 7 days' time to file its reply. The character of Waqf assets will not undergo any change. And lastly, there will be no stay on the law that's been passed by Parliament, but the stay has been ordered on certain provisions, like I said, restoring provisions of the Waqf by user clause and also the stay on appointment of non-Muslims. Now, why is this problematic? Now, one of the contentions and the reason why the centre brought in this new law was to remove this problematic clause called Waqf by user. What is Waqf by user? Let's try and explain that to simple terms for our viewers to understand. Waqf by user simply refers to a situation where there is a property, it could even be an idle piece of land, which is treated as a Waqf property simply because it has been used for a period of time either for religious or charitable purposes. Even if that said property does not have a formal or legal declaration by the owner does not have requisite property papers, if there are certain Islamic practices that are being followed in that premises for a period of time, then automatically it becomes what is called Waqf by user property. Now this provision is not there in the Hindu religion. There is no Hindu by user property. It's not there in Christianity. There's no Christian by user property. It's not there in Sikhism. There is no Sikh by user property. This provision existed only in Islamic law, only in Waqf by user categories of property, which some of the petitioners out of the 70 had argued, those who were arguing for the law, they had said that this is ultra vires of the Constitution because Article 14 and 15 are equality and equality before the law. Now, what does the data say? I want to look at the Vamsi portal, which is the portal that collates and collects all the Waqf properties across the length and breadth of the country. This is the nodal portal which has that data. So the Vamsi portal data simply says that there are more than 8 lakh, in fact more than 8.7 lakh properties that are Waqf properties, that are deemed as Waqf properties across the country. Out of these 8.7 lakh, more than half, 4 lakh or almost half, 4 lakh properties are identified as Waqf by user, which means they may or may not necessarily have the papers to prove that they are Waqf property, but there were certain practices that were carried out in those properties, and thereby using the clause of Waqf by user, which was section 40 in the previous law, these properties, more than 4 lakh of them, have become Waqf by user property. The central government removed that clause from the new amendment which got passed. Basically, the centre's argument was this will prevent false and unilateral claims on land. This will also streamline the process. But critics say that by omitting this provision, the Act could potentially create disputes surrounding long-time Waqf properties, which, for whatever reason, do not possess valid Waqfnama or valid property papers. Let's listen in to some of the arguments that were made by the lawyers and then subsequently what they said in sound bites to reporters outside the Supreme Court.
भविष्य में जो होगा वो वक्फ बाय यूजर नहीं होगा। वक्फ बाय यूजर खत्म किया है भविष्य के लिए, लेकिन अगर पास्ट में कोई है जिसकी डीड नहीं है और वो मस्जिद है तो वक्फ रहेगा।
The Supreme Court has said that the Central Waqf Council and the State Waqf Boards will not be constituted. Waqf by user cannot be deleted.
So, following the observations by the Supreme Court, the Centre has conceded and made 3 assurances until the next hearing, which is going to be on the 5th of May in a couple of weeks from now. Number one, the Centre has agreed through its counsels, the Solicitor General, that no non-Muslims will be appointed to any of the Waqf boards, either the Central Board or to the various state boards. Second, the Waqf by user status will continue. They will not tinker with the Waqf by user status for all the 8 lakh plus properties across the country. No state Waqf boards will be formed. Basically, the state Waqf boards would have then had to follow the provision of having 2 non-Muslim members along with 20-odd Muslim members. But now, the Centre is assured that until the next hearing, no state Waqf boards will be formed either. Now, the Supreme Court, in the process, has granted 7 days' time to the Centre to file a reply on the pleas. Following this, once the Centre files its reply, it will be made available to the petitioners. The petitioners will get 5 days' time to review the Centre's reply. And then on the 5th of May, when the court reconvenes to hear this matter, there will be an interim order once the petitioners have reviewed the reply of the Centre, once the court has also perused the reply of the Centre, and then eventually the court would pass out an interim order on the 5th of May. Remember, the current Chief Justice retires on the 13th of May. That's why the urgency to hear this matter and, if not a full order, but at least pass some form of an interim order. But does that add up? Does that make sense? Let's look at the legal perspective. I want to leave the politics aside for 1 second. We've been talking about a lot about the politics. Let's strictly focus on the law itself. And what is it that the court found problematic in the law that's been passed by Parliament recently? Mr. Siddharth Luthra is a senior advocate with the Supreme Court. Thank you very much, Mr. Luthra, for joining us. So the Waqf hearing in the Supreme Court, very significant developments happening. The court basically saying that parts of the law will not be implemented up until the next hearing, which is the 5th of May, when the court may be inclined to passing an interim order. Now, there were 2 points of contention that the court had raised. One, which is a critical aspect, which is the Waqf by user clause. What is the court's apprehension around the Waqf by user clause? Because that was removed entirely from the amendment that was passed in Parliament. And what would the argument be? Because no other religion has this clause. Hinduism, Christianity, Sikhism, Buddhism, no other religion has this by user clause. It's only Waqf by user.
So the point is, there are practices called essential religious practices of various religions, and that may not be uniform, that may not apply to other religions. The argument that the petitioners had sought to make was that charity is an essential tenet of their religion. And today the court has not determined whether this is or is not. And therefore the fact that Waqf by user has been recognized by the courts over a period of time to allow a statute to stop this would have been rather radical. And therefore I believe the court has rightly kept it in abeyance till it can have a more defined and detailed discussion on the subject. So I think it was it's an important outlook. The court has restrained, and it's not a very long date. It's only till the 5th of May, and the court proposed to hear and determine the matter.
So there were about 70 odd petitioners. A large majority of them were opposed to the amendment that was passed. There were some who also were in favor of the amendment, and they had their own reasons. But one fundamental argument that they've been making is that this Waqf by user clause is fundamentally against Articles 14 and 15, the right to equality and the equality before law. How would you view that particular argument that's been made?
So I'll tell you this, the answer is simple. In the Constitution, and we have to look at it from the Constitution, there are exceptions to Article 14 which are carved out in Article 15, 16, Article 26. So we have exception for linguistic and religious minorities. And therefore, Article 14 by itself, the principle in Article 14 is you can't treat unequals equally. Also, the Constitution protects the right of freedom to propagate your own religion. And that is something which is fundamental to our constitutional republic. Therefore, while the argument may be made that it's an Article 14 issue, then it is for people who are claiming that this should be a secular outlook. That is to say, it should apply across religions and not limited to one religion, are arguing Article 14, but unmindful of the fact that if it is a religious practice, it need not apply to other communities.
Okay.
By way of example, there are various practices, which we recognize within Hinduism, within Christianity. There are various norms which are recognized. There are succession norms. For example, under the Hindu Succession Act, you have the HUF concept. Now, the HUF concept is nowhere other than Hinduism.
Yeah.
And that being the position, tomorrow if somebody was to, and I hope this doesn't happen, but if somebody was to attack the HUF concept to say, look, this is in breach of Article 14, though it is regulated by Hindu Succession Act. Similarly, certain customs are protected both by Hindu Succession Act as also by the Hindu Marriage Act. So all these there are some practices which laws regulating religions, certain religious communities protect, whereas others have been found to be not regulated by law. Today, what the statute was trying to do, the Amendment Act, was to do away with a category of waqfs, that's waqf by user, which has been recognized. Now, that itself will have to be determined whether it is an essential tenet of the religion Islam or not.
So,
if it is not an essential tenet, then it could be regulated. But if it is essential, then it will fall in a different category.
One final word, Mr. Luthra. The other concern which the court had flagged off was the appointment of non-Muslims, two of them, to the Waqf boards, to the Waqf councils, etc. The government's argument is that these boards are not of a religious nature. These are simply administrative boards. Why didn't the court buy that argument?
Well, it's a very simple thing. We've always said that we should not interfere with the rights of minorities. That is what sets India apart as a constitutional republic. Similarly, there is a whole debate that there are litigation on in the Supreme Court that Hindu temples have to be governed by Hindus and no others.
Yeah.
So therefore, the issue is this. When a waqf is a creation of a religious practice or part of a religious practice, then the ability to govern that, which is meant for the benefit of the larger community, ought to be done by the community members themselves, because they understand the nuances of what is appropriate for that community. And to that extent, it is fine. Yes, in terms of, let's say, taxation, in terms of rent laws, in terms of property laws, in terms of property tax, those are matters which can be regulated by normal laws. But to say that non-Muslims should come in on the Waqf is something which I think the court rightly had a concern about, and hence has opined on it.
All right, Siddharth Luthra, thank you very much for joining us and putting that into perspective. Senior advocate of the Supreme Court, explaining what happened in court today and what the court's concerns were that it flagged, and how the centre may respond to that in a week's time. Now, even as the Waqf debate continues to rage on, the spotlight now has shifted to the centre versus judiciary debate. This after the Vice President, Jagdeep Dhankar, made some pretty interesting remarks. He commented on the powers of the Supreme Court. The Vice President today said that there cannot be a situation in a democracy where the courts direct the president, the courts direct the executive. There were two significant sort of judgments or interventions by the court that we've seen in recent times. Number one happened last week in the Tamil Nadu governor, Arun Ravi, versus the state of Tamil Nadu case, where 10 bills that were passed by the Tamil Nadu Assembly were not given assent by the governor. The Supreme Court took a very dim view of the governor's actions and said the governor's actions were not in keeping with the constitutional spirit. It overrode the powers of the governor and indeed the powers of the president and said those 10 bills need to be passed forthwith. It also, and this is where the controversial part is, the court had said that in case there is a constitutional question involved, either the governor is in doubt or the president is in doubt, then the president, he or she, is well within their constitutional rights to seek the opinion of the court in section 143 of the Constitution. Now, here's the thing. This, many lawmakers, particularly those on the Treasury benches, feel is an interference in the lawmaking process, which is entirely in the domain of the legislature. Let's listen in to what Vice President Thankar had to say. He also brought in, by the way, this whole controversy surrounding cash, burning piles of cash that were recovered at the residence of a former Delhi High Court judge.
Article 142. Article 142 has become a nuclear missile against democratic forces. Available to Judiciary 24/7 judges who will legislate, who will perform executive functions, who will act as super parliament, and absolutely have no accountability because law of the land does not apply to them. We cannot have a situation where you direct President of India. And on what basis?
The Vice President also claimed that there cannot be a situation where Article 142 is used as a nuclear missile. But what exactly is this contentious provision? Now, this is a very, very rarely used provision. It was cited in the Supreme Court judgment in the Tamil Nadu case, where Article 142 basically empowers the Supreme Court to pass orders to ensure, quote-unquote, complete justice. The orders passed are binding. It's enforceable across the country. It has writ even over the executive, including over the president. The Supreme Court's discretion is important in deciding what constitutes complete justice. Now, one example is the Chandigarh mayor elections, where the Supreme Court invoked Article 142 of the Constitution to overturn the results of the election. The election was, of course, marred by all kinds of irregularities, electoral malpractices. There was the illegal conduct of the presiding officer, who had already announced the winner by invalidating as many as 8 votes in favor of one of his opponents, and that led to an incorrect declaration of the winner. So the court invoked these extraordinary powers under 142 and overturned the decision of the presiding officer in that election. The decision was made by the Supreme Court to, quote-unquote, ensure complete justice and uphold the sanctity of the electoral process in that mayoral election. So this is going to be a debate that will continue both inside and outside of Parliament, both in the corridors of power as well as, of course, in the corridors of high legal offices, including the Supreme Court. I want to move on to another debate which has been stoked off by the Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir, who's triggered a storm and by raking up the two-nation theory and emphasized that India and Pakistan are fundamentally and have always been two different nations. From going on to explain how Hindus and Muslims are different in almost every aspect of life, the food, the dressing, the culture, right from the practice of religion, customs, traditions, even the way they think, to calling for the story of Pakistan and why Pakistan was created as an Islamic country, as an Islamic entity. He says, the Pakistan Army Chief, that this is a story that had the forbearance of the forefathers of the creation of Pakistan, and this is a story that he reckons should be narrated to future generations of Pakistanis. General Asim Munir then went on this entire anti-Hindu, anti-India rant, saying specifically the justification for the two-nation theory. Now, here's the thing. I want to play out what General Munir said, and then I want to come out of it and ask some pertinent questions which are very relevant. Maybe not to the higher echelons of the security corridors in Pakistan, because their view is very clear, as has been espoused by the Pakistan Army Chief, But certainly there are some questions that need to be asked of folks here in India, in political corridors as well as in diplomatic and security corridors. But first, let's listen to what the Pakistani Army Chief had to say.
Forefathers, they thought that we are different from the Hindus in every possible aspect of life. Our religion is different, our customs are different, our traditions are different, our thoughts are different, our ambitions are different. That was the foundation of the two-nation theory that was laid there. That we are two nations, we are not one nation. My dear brothers and sisters and sons and daughters, please don't forget the story of Pakistan. And don't forget to narrate this story of Pakistan to your next generation.
So, this is not new. General Munir is not the first Pakistani to toe this line, this whole stuff about the two-nation theory. This is what Pakistan's founding father, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, has been saying 75 years ago. In fact, even before that, even before partition happened, back in 1940, Jinnah had claimed that it's a dream that Hindus and Muslims can ever evolve as a common nationality. 3 years later, in 1943, Jinnah claimed that there is nothing in life that links Hindus and Muslims together. And a year later, in 1944, again, all of these three instances are before 1947 when the partition happened. So he was making a case for why there should be a two-nation theory. A year later, in 1944, Jinnah said that Muslims and Hindus are two major nations by definition or by the test for any nation. So this is the foundational principle on which the nation of Pakistan was founded. But we have here in India some people who believe that there is Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb, that there is, Aman Ki Asha, that it is possible to have a normal relationship with Pakistan. If General Munir, and he is just a symptom of the thinking in the higher echelons of the security architecture in Pakistan. This is the thinking, because let's be very clear about this. Pakistan's foreign policy, and most certainly Pakistan's India policy, is decided in Rawalpindi. It's not decided in Islamabad. And if the general who is at the high table of power in Rawalpindi is underlining the very cause célèbre or the very raison d'etre for why his country came into existence, and he feels it's absolutely relevant even today, 75 years on. And it's been relevant, according to him, all the way from the 7th century when Islam was founded. Now, General Munir's comments come at a time when clearly the Pakistan Army is under pressure. And maybe some of these comments are to try and divert attention from those pain points. Number one, there is huge upsurge in attacks, as we saw a few days ago by the Balochistan Liberation Army, the train attack that happened there. There is massive unrest that's going on in Balochistan, and that's a direct challenge to the authority of the Pakistani Army and the Pakistani Army Chief. Then in Balochistan itself, and this is a big point of contention for the Chinese as well, there's massive projects that are happening in CPEC. China has sunk in something like $60 billion into CPEC, and Chinese projects, Chinese nationals are getting attacked time and time again. Balochistan is not the only pain point. The Pakistan-Afghanistan border on either side of the Durand line, there are massive attacks virtually on a daily basis by the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan and their affiliates on the other side of the Durand line, the Afghan Taliban. Again, this is a direct challenge to the authority and the writ of the Pakistani Army, and specifically the Pakistani Army Chief. The Pakistani Army has also been clashing with the Taliban, both the Pakistan Taliban and the Afghan Taliban at that border on either side of the Durand line. And what has further dented the image of Pakistan's army are massive charges of corruption which have been written in the form of a letter by officers of the Pakistan Army, junior, mid-level officers who had brought these charges against senior leadership of the Pakistan Army and said that there needs to be an end to all of this corruption. So there are pain points. Is General Munir's comments about Kashmir, about Hindu and Muslim being two separate identities, two separate nations, and the twain shall never meet, as it were, proverbially, is that to be read in the context of all of these pain points? But let me go across to Professor Brahmacharani, strategic affairs expert, who's joining us. Kamar Chima, Pakistani strategic affairs expert, will also join us. So, Professor Brahmacharani, there are some who would say that, look, there's nothing new in what General Munir has said. This is what Jinnah said as a justification for the two-nation theory. And General Munir is being very true to that hypothesis of the two-nation theory. The question is, are we as clear-eyed that the twain shall never meet. That the idea of having a Hindu nation and a Muslim nation was not something that the Brits alone did, that this was fundamentally something that, as General Munir says, this was a greater Islamic project. That according to him, after Mecca and Medina, Pakistan was the only geographical entity anywhere in the world that was created first and exclusively for Muslims. That's his worldview.
You raise a relevant question. The thing is that General Munir's speech reflects the growing Islamist tendencies in the Pakistan military. Right from the 1980s, we have seen how radical Islamism has been gaining deep roots in the Pakistan military. But the question is about India. There are people in India, including in the governments, successive governments we have seen, who have had this delusion that Pakistan is a rational actor and that peace should be given a chance. We had Vajpayee going to Lahore on a bus and then crying publicly that the bus was hijacked to Kargil. Manmohan Singh made all sorts of peace overtures to Pakistan, and in response, India got the horrific Mumbai terrorist attacks of 2008. And then we had Modi landing in Lahore. He landed in Lahore unannounced, and that in turn was followed by a series of major Pakistani terrorist attacks on Indian military bases, including Rampur, Uri, Pathankot, etc. So the issue that we need to ask ourselves is why? Why is it that we don't understand the true nature of Pakistan? For example, in the last 10 years alone, in cross-border raids, Pakistan's border action teams have beheaded several Indian soldiers, including carting away the severed heads. They have not even spared civilians. They have decapitated an Indian civilian, for example, in 2019. Those in the deep hole of naked barbarism will stay in that deep hole. So why don't people in New Delhi understand the reality about Pakistan? That Pakistan that we see today is not an agent for peace or regional stability.
Okay, let me ask Mr. Qamar Cheema. General Munir is entitled to his views. In fact, I think he's very clear-eyed about why he thinks his country exists and what his country's India policy should be. We have a separate quibble with whether India is as clear-eyed about its Pakistan policy as General Munir seems to be about his India policy. But my question to you, Mr. Cheema, is why should then India ever be asked or expected for the hand of friendship when your army chief is saying in as many words that Hindu and Muslim will never be the same, that we can never be one nation, that we will always be two nations? That's the whole fundamental basis and the raison d'etre for the creation of the two-nation theory. He is justifying that 75 years on. So then why should India extend the hand of friendship? Why should India say, if the Pakistan army chief is saying that we are two fundamentally different people and the twain shall never meet, proverbially, then why should India be expected to extend the hand of friendship?
Well, frankly speaking, what General Munir said, that was what the Pakistani founding fathers said. He has nothing said something new. So the most important thing at the moment is that Pakistan is an independent country. India is an independent country. If India can live with the other 56 countries, why India cannot live peacefully with the Pakistan? Now, my question to sir who was speaking earlier was, now the question is very clear. You call yourself as that you propagate globally, Prime Minister, Mr. Gandhi's narrative to the worldwide that we are non-violent. But Indians have been killing Pakistanis inside Pakistan. India, the Canadians, the Americans, India is involved in transnational repression. Isn't it a question which the world is asking India? Why is this so? So the question remains that you want to talk to Pakistan on your terms and conditions, and Prime Minister Modi also agreed. After independence, countries and they should live the way they are. So I think the Indian authorities have accepted this, the Pakistani authorities also accept this, that we need to remain independent countries and we need to work independently.
No. One
But I
second,
think
one second. The problem, the nub of the problem, Mr. Chima, is General Munir is extending that whole two-nation theory and saying that Kashmir will be the jugular vein. Kashmir is a Muslim majority province, and therefore till Kashmir becomes part of Pakistan, this would be an unfinished project. Now, if you are going to look at this entire thing, no, one second. That's what he said. These are not my words. These are his words. Now, my point is, then why are we having a peace process? Why are we having Mr. Vajpayee in Lahore? Why are we having General Musharraf here in Agra? Why are we having Prime Minister Modi attending Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding? I mean, and in the last 7 or 8 years post Uri, we've not had a normal diplomatic relationship. We don't have high commissioners in each other's countries. You then ask why? It's precisely because of this mindset. It's precisely because of this thinking, which has been articulated by the Pakistan Army Chief, that the twain shall never meet. That Hindu and Muslim were fundamentally not meant to be one nation.
But the question is, he's absolutely right. This is a message. This is the genesis of the creation of Pakistan. So there is nothing new which he's talking, one thing. And secondly, if he is saying that we cannot live together, he's right. We can see that how Muslims are living in India. They are not happy at least.
So if we can't live together, then why should we bother having diplomacy?
Every day,
if we can't live together, as the general seems to suggest, then why have diplomacy? That's exactly what the Indian government is also asking. Let's not have a normal diplomatic relationship. We are both incapable of having a normal diplomatic relationship.
There are only charged affairs. There is no diplomacy. There is nothing going on, and it has been decided by Prime Minister Modi.
No, precisely because of the mindset as has been articulated by the Army Chief. That look, we can't be two normal countries.
The Army Chief said it today. And you have disbanded the.
No, that's exactly. You yourself said what he has said is no different from what the founding father of Pakistan said 75 years ago. It's the same strain of thought. So if the strain of thought is the same,
absolutely.
Then how can you have a normal diplomatic relationship?
The question is, if Hindus and Muslims can be independently, they can live independently. India has good relations with the UAE, which is a Muslim country, with Bangladesh, with Saudi Arabia. Then Pakistan and India, we are separate independent
Mr. Chima,
countries.
let Professor Chelani respond to that. One second. The Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi is not saying that Hindus and Muslims can never be together. The Crown Prince of Dubai is not saying that. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is not saying that. In fact, the Prime Minister is going to be in Saudi Arabia next week. None of those leaders are saying what has been articulated by your Army Chief. That's the problem. Anyway, let Professor Chelani respond and then I'll wrap after that. Yeah.
General Munir's Islamist thinking is the kind of thinking that has decimated minorities in Pakistan. When Pakistan was created, 23% of its population comprised minorities. Today, they make up barely 1% to 2%, and they face untold persecution. By contrast, the share of Muslims in the Indian population, has grown from 9.8% in the 1951 census to over 15% today. So you can see how the Muslims in India have not only managed to expand in terms of in their numbers, they're living peacefully and living in peaceful coexistence with Hindus. By contrast, there is significant unrest and separatist activity across much of Pakistan other than in Pakistani Punjab. That tells you a lot about the alienation of non-Punjabi Muslims from the Pakistanis.
I just want to close by saying General Munir should read history a little more, because this whole idea of the two-nation theory completely got disbanded with the 1971 war. If the creation of Pakistan was as an Islamic state meant only for Muslims, then how come the Bengali Muslims wanted to have nothing to do with the state of Pakistan? So that whole idea, that notion of two-nation theory completely got shredded to pieces after the 1971 war. Number one. Number two, there are as many, if not more, Muslims who are living in India side by side with their Hindu brethren as there are Muslims in Pakistan. So the last thing that General Munir should be giving lessons in is how Hindus and Muslims are fundamentally different and can't live together and have to live in two different nations. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. So the United States has now imposed a 245% tariff on most Chinese imports into America. A few days ago, both countries had raised their tariff levels, 145% by America, 125% by China. China also hit back with a ban on 7 critical rare earth minerals to the U.S., which are used in critical technologies like EV batteries, semiconductor chips, computer servers, which are used for large computing in artificial intelligence. Now, this is a tit for tat, and it seems to be going down an escalatory and frankly a meaningless path. I mean, if you're not going to buy at 100% tariffs, why would you buy at 245% tariffs? There was one thing, though, that China said in all of this melee that's happening between Beijing and Washington, is that what China is looking for is respect. The White House press secretary says it's about who comes to the negotiating table first. Essentially, the question that begs to be asked is, has this now become less about tariffs and who retaliates against whom, but more a question of a game of who blinks first?
The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them. There's no difference between China and any other country except they are much larger.
So what exactly are these rare earth minerals which China has put a ban on export to the United States? They're a group of 17 minerals which are crucial in manufacturing some of the most important things in our daily lives, from smartphones to electric batteries to semiconductors. China has banned 7 out of these 17 minerals from being exported to America. How did China, though, gain so much control of the world's rare earth minerals? Even though China has less than 40% of the world's rare earth deposits, it still controls 90% of rare earth processing. And how does America and frankly the rest of the world stop China from using rare earths as a weapon of diplomacy? China's recent decision to halt the exports of 7 critical rare earth elements to the United States marks a significant escalation in the ongoing trade war between both countries. This move, which was announced earlier this week, directly impacts the supply chains for electric vehicles, semiconductors, advanced weapon systems, and renewable energy. By restricting access to these materials, China is leveraging its dominance in the global rare earths market. This is being seen as a geostrategic maneuver by China, which underscores the growing importance of rare earth mineral resources in the geopolitics of the 21st century. The Chinese Ministry of Commerce added dysprosium, terbium, lutetium, and 4 other rare earth elements to its restricted exports list. This effectively freezes shipments to the United States unless special licenses are granted by China's Ministry of Commerce. However, China's licensing system is still largely underdeveloped, and that creates great amount of uncertainty for industries that are reliant on these rare earth materials. China says it is putting in place a new regulatory system, but that is going to be time-consuming. This action by China follows decades of Chinese control over rare earth production and processing. Right now, China accounts for 60% of global rare earth extraction and nearly 90% of refining capacity. It is this which China is leveraging as an instrument of global geopolitics. Beijing's decision is being widely interpreted as a retaliation against American restrictions on semiconductor exports to China that have been put in place by the Trump administration. As Guillaume Pitron, who is the author of The Rare Metals War, noted in a recent piece, and I quote, China is leveraging its control over rare earths just as the United States seeks to limit China's access to advanced semiconductor chips. Historically, China has weaponized rare earth exports during previous political disputes, such as the 2010 embargo against Japan over territorial tensions. This is when things came to a head over a bunch of islands in the East China Sea, which both countries claim as their own. Rare earth elements, or REEs, are a group of 17 metals which are critical to high-tech and green technologies. Key applications of rare earths include high-performance magnets for electric vehicles, wind turbines and hard drives, heat-resistant magnets for aerospace and defense weapon systems, camera lenses, hybrid car batteries, and petroleum refining. Despite their name, rare earths are not actually all that rare. They are abundant globally, but are environmentally destructive to extract and to refine. That is one factor which led Western countries to outsource production of rare earths to China starting in the 1980s. Today, these rare earths underpin $7 trillion in global economic output, and that drives the status of rare earths as geopolitical assets. They're not just economic assets anymore, they're also geopolitical instruments. And China has not hesitated from using or weaponizing rare earths for geopolitical reasons. China's rare earth dominance stems from a deliberate policy. Now, back in the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping, China's then leader, said this, that the Middle East has oil and China has rare earths. And this set the stage for state-backed consolidation and mining and refining of rare earths by China's SOEs, or state-owned enterprises. By the 2000s, China flooded the global markets with cheap rare earths, thereby bankrupting competitors like America's Mountain Pass mine. This strategy allowed China to control 85% of all processing capacity by 2024. That is despite the fact that China holds less than 40% of the global reserves of rare earths. But China uses rare earths as a weapon of diplomacy. In the past, it has used this leverage, including in 2010. At that time, Beijing had placed an embargo of rare earths against Japan during a maritime dispute, which led to a tenfold price increase in the cost of smartphones, something that Japan could ill afford. Now, this entire territorial dispute was over a bunch of remote, uninhabited islands in the East China Sea. China then used it again in 2023 when it put in place export curbs on gallium and germanium during the U.S. China tech wars. It also led to a tit-for-tat by the then Biden administration, which made it much harder for Beijing to manufacture high-end semiconductor chips, which are critical for large computing and which are the mainstay now for artificial intelligence companies. The Trump administration faces urgent pressure to mitigate the supply chain vulnerabilities in the export of these rare earths. The immediate response from the Trump White House includes mulling a national security semiconductor tariff. President Trump has announced a separate investigation into semiconductor trade practices with a proposed tariff that is expected to be in the range of 25 to 30% in a bid to try and incentivize domestic production. He tweeted that he wants a complete investigation into the entire electronic supply chain of semiconductors that are coming into the United States. Some of America's biggest companies, Apple, Nvidia, Intel, all depend on semiconductor chips that are imported from China.
The tariffs will be in place in the not distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things. And that'll take place in the very near future.
It could also lead to stockpiling. Already we're seeing big companies like GM and Lockheed Martin who are racing to secure existing rare earth magnet inventories. They've got stockpile sizes that vary widely, but this is only something that bigger players can afford to do. The small businesses will get caught blindsided in this giant trade war. The only possible upside of these ongoing semiconductor wars and these rare earth export controls is the revival of domestic production in the United States. The US is reviving the Mountain Pass mine in California. It's also investing over $1 billion in Texas-based rare earth processing facilities. However, there are multiple challenges. There is still a massive processing gap. The United States lacks China's advanced refining infrastructure. 100% of the mined rare earths are still sent to China for processing. Also, there's the question of time lag. Building an independent supply chain could take anywhere between 5 to even 10 years, risking short-term disruptions in critical sectors like defense, automotive, smartphones, and high-end renewables. While the European Union and Australia are accelerating rare earth mining projects, these initiatives face environmental opposition as well as technical hurdles in those respective countries. As Philip Andrew Speed of the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies has warned, no country can replicate China's refining ecosystem overnight. China's rare earth embargo exemplifies the fusion of economic statecraft and resource nationalism, and it comes at a time of great power rivalry between Washington and Beijing. For the United States, achieving rare earth mineral independence will require unprecedented private and public sector partnership. It will also mean trade alliances with Australia, Japan, India, and even breakthroughs in recycling technology. As these policies unfold over a period of time, the electronics industry worldwide must brace for air turbulence ahead. The rush for rare earths can be called the new gold rush, or even the race to secure the oil of the 21st century. America won the previous gold rush and the previous oil rush. Can it win, though, the rush for rare earths? Let's go straight across to Professor William Kirby. He's a professor of China Studies at the Harvard University. Professor, let's talk about this, retaliatory, tit for tat, tariff for tariff escalatory cycle that's been going on between Washington and Beijing for a few weeks now. It's at 245%, Beijing at 125%. I think at some point, the value of those tariffs become meaningless. It's a question of what's the way out of this. And I was curious and interested in knowing your thoughts on what the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said, I think it was yesterday, that what China is looking for is respect. So what's the respectable way out of this? And I think the White House spokesperson said that it should be China that comes to the table and not the other way around. What's the meeting ground here, if at all there is one?
Well, I think in diplomacy, in the world of diplomacy, anyone who knows any diplomatic history of how governments interact with each other, it begins with respect that's actually built into the rules of international diplomacy. That's why there are protocol officers. That's why there are protocols of how to deal with difficult situations, one nation to another. So we have to recognize the fact that it was not China that started this trade war. It was the United States in a unilateral attack via tariffs. There's no other way of spinning this. And the Chinese side, and you have in the press, at least in the United States, all of this kind of vitriol being hurled against Chinese companies, whether they're state-owned or private, differentiating between none of them, and an approach that really has led to a major crisis in U.S. China relations without a clear diplomatic off-ramp for the United States. It's perfectly reasonable for the Chinese government to ask for respect, to be treated as a great power, which it is, to be treated simply as an equal, a sovereign nation. And if the Americans can do that and begin to deal more professionally with our Chinese partners, because they are partners in so many matters economic, if we can do that, I think the Chinese side will begin to find an off-ramp also.
But I'm just curious, let's game this out, right? At some point, let's say, this madness stops and both sides come to the negotiating table, and let's look at the best case scenario. They're able to hammer out a deal. But given just how much bad blood there is between China and the United States right now, between the current two administrations in both countries, and frankly, in Washington, there seems to be a bipartisan consensus when it comes to how to deal with China. The question then arises, are we looking at a fundamental decoupling of the American and Chinese economies? And if it is, what may that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, it won't mean good things for either China or the United States, nor will it mean good things for the rest of the world if that were to happen. I don't believe that will happen. And if it does happen, it will be, sadly, because of these unilateral American actions. But what you have, and you're right to some degree that there's a bipartisan consensus of concern about China. There is not a bipartisan consensus that issuing extraordinarily, almost laughably high tariffs is the right way to deal with China or any other country if one wants to establish what we believe to be more fair trading rules. There are rules of the game that are established in WTO and elsewhere that the American side, sadly, and I say this as an American very sadly, is flouting openly at this time. But I don't believe, we are intertwined successfully over the last 25 years, economically, also culturally to a very considerable degree. The large numbers of Chinese students who come to the United States for overseas study at the secondary and tertiary level. This is part of the web of relationships between China and the United States. And if we cut those off one by one, we end up in a much more dangerous world. We end up in a world in which there will be fewer and fewer Americans who actually understand China and fewer Chinese who understand the United States. It would not be good for us, for them, for anybody else.
Just to understand what Trump's objective here is, we can always agree that his methods are completely out of the park here, but the principle that he seems to be espousing is the trade between the US and China is so imbalanced, and you can't continue like this with $200 billion deficit, and God knows how much the deficit will increase if trade were to continue in the path that it has continued over the last 20 years. So the argument that he's making, or the case that he's making, is we need to rebalance that trade. Is there a merit in that case? And if there is merit, how would you go about rebalancing that trade?
Okay. Let's assume that there is merit to that argument, because you could make the same argument about the United States and India, with whom we have a sizable trade imbalance, exactly. As well, as we do with many countries around the world. I think most serious economists do not believe that the strength of an economy is measured by the strength of its trade balances or imbalances. But putting that aside, let's assume that it's a problem, as it was a perceived problem in the 1980s in the economic relations between the United States and Japan. In those days, actually several members of the current Trump administration served in the administration of President Reagan, who sought to bring Japan, again, certain economic actions against Japan, trying to bring them to the table to have a more balanced trading relationships. What was one of the most important outcomes of that? It was that we welcomed Japanese investment in the United States as a means of counterbalancing. For example, rather than buying Toyotas and Nissans only from Tokyo, we had them build plants in the United States very successfully, and they are now as much American car makers as they are Japanese car makers. This was at the end of the day, a win-win situation for both countries, and it improved the domestic U.S. automobile manufacturing sector because they had to compete now with these Japanese cars, which were simply better made. So, if you look to the future today, if we had an administration that understood that a central part of the future of automotive transit is going to be electric vehicles, then who's the leader in the world in this? It's China by a huge margin. If we are to be competitive in this, we should bring to the United States BYD, NIO, Xiaomi, these extraordinary Chinese companies. I was just recently in China and I test drove some of these cars. They make a Tesla look like a Model T. They're that good. These are, and we should be bringing them to manufacture in the United States in a way that would lead Ford and General Motors also to compete with them directly, and it would lead to their improvement, but it would lead to greater choices for American consumers, and it would lead to employment in the United States. That's an intelligent way to balance the trade, but it is not one that I see in the offing, and it's not among the things that the Trump administration itself is welcoming, though I can guarantee you every governor or every mayor of a municipality in which such a plant would be built would welcome them.
And finally, since you have been associated for many years with the Harvard University, you teach there, Trump's been, of course, really, this is a war on higher education in the United States. It's not just Harvard. It started with Columbia and then Brown and Princeton, the most elite Ivy League schools in the United States. And I can't think of greater brand ambassadors for brand America than these great institutions, including yours. Why is Trump seemingly on this war against these elite schools?
Well, in some sense, if you look at it historically, it's a culmination of a growing estrangement between those on the political right in the United States and higher education. This has its roots actually in many ways decades ago at the time of the Vietnam War. When
им возможность, вы имеете возможность общаться между собой, или нет вашего отца с вами. Сейчас ни в коем случае не хочу давать никаких политических оценок тем событиям, которые происходят, но все, что с вами произошло, это большая беда, а то, что удалось вам оказаться на свободе, это результат того, что в России стабильные многолетние отношения с палестинским народом, с его представителями, самыми разными организациями. И думаю, нужно выразить слова благодарности руководству политическому крылу Хамас за то, что они пошли нам навстречу и совершили вот этот акт, гуманитарный акт, вас освободили. Я вас как раз с этим и хочу поздравить. Надежда на то, что все люди, которые находятся в том положении, в котором были.
Прежде всего поблагодарить вас лично и все российское правительство.
Разумеется, мы будем делать все для того, чтобы подобные акты совершались как можно чаще, и чтобы все люди, которые еще находятся в таких условиях, в которых вы провели столько много времени, чтобы они тоже были освобождены.
Внук был в плену. У меня начался очень тяжелый период Российской Федерации в Израиле. Посол России Анатолий Дмитриевич Викторович во время боевых действий и попала в плен к нацистам. И смогла бежать.
Благодарен очень за ваши действия, личные действия, чтобы вы вышли на свободу. И я тоже хочу сказать, что для меня это очень-очень важно. В этом моменте еще все остальные наружники тоже вышли на свободу, потому что я знаю, как они чувствуют, я знаю, чего они, как это там, как это тяжело, как они встречали. И для меня они как братья. Для меня как будто, когда они там, это как будто пол моего сердца еще там в Газе, и как будто мне очень будет трудно вернуться к моей жизни, нормальной жизни, каждое время, что они там.
Даже во время трудностей ваша поддержка очень важна. Действительно, будем работать обязательно.
Я вас очень прошу, чтобы вы продолжали делать все, что вы делали для меня и всего этого. И я знал, что вы делали очень много, чтобы они тоже могли быть на свободе и быть счастливы, как я сейчас счастлив, когда я сижу рядом с моей семьей, с моими людьми, что я очень люблю. Это для меня очень-очень важно.
Все возможно. Я говорил маме, что не только молитва, если помните. Им возможность, вы имеете возможность общаться между собой, или нет вашего отца с вами. Сейчас ни в коем случае не хочу давать никаких политических оценок тем событиям, которые происходят.
Viewers, it's a very significant day today. Let me tell you this. Unequivocally, let me tell you that the debate we're going to have today has massive consequences for the manner in which the various organs of the state talk to each other, work with each other, where they see each other in respect to each other. The outcome, viewers, of a